To Tripadvisor Talk, a weekly discussion show in which we connect with leaders from the travel sector to talk about what's happening, how and when we can start traveling again, and the changing face of our industry in light of recent events. My name is Jeffrey Marsh. I've actually been working in the travel industry for over 20 years. I was on the startup team at Orbitz and led all of the brand's LGBTQ plus initiatives. I'm currently a consultant for brands that seek to target the community. I'm very excited to introduce today's panel, starting with Mr. Cordy Lash, managing partner of Icon Group and a true pioneer in the hospitality industry, Ms. Luann Halden, VP of Communications at the International LGBTQ Plus Travel Association, Mr. Brian Herb, co-founder of Zoom Vacations and a true gay travel guru featured in many online and offline media vehicles. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Caitlin Thompson, senior UX researcher and co-chair of Pride at Trip at Tripadvisor. Welcome, everyone. As we're celebrating Pride this month, today's session focuses on LGBTQ plus travel. Specifically, what is the impact of the LGBTQ plus community on the travel industry, and what are the key considerations around post-COVID-19 travel? I'm actually going to start with a question that doesn't have a precise answer, but there definitely is some data. And that is, how big is the LGBTQ plus consumer segment? What percent is it of the overall population? And Luann, I think you have some data to share with us.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. As far as the data on this one goes, it's the question that everyone asks in the media, and it's one of the hardest things to answer specifically. But the general consensus is that the LGBTQ population accounts for 5 to 10% of the overall population, which even if you look at the conservative side of that is a very significant part of our market. And we use LGBT Capital as a reference point, which does an evaluation of the overall global spending power of the LGBT community. And their most recent data estimated it at $3.6 trillion a year.
That's impressive. I think the only thing I would add is that it's no surprise that millennials and Gen Z self-identify in a greater amount. So over 8% of millennials self-identify as LGBTQ, but obviously a smaller percentage for Gen X and baby boomers. But you're right, it is a sizable segment. Moving on, what do LGBTQ plus travelers have in common with general market travelers? And what are some of the key differences?
So, good morning, Jeff. Good morning, panelists. Basically, when you look at that space, LGBTQ plus travelers are oftentimes identifying community when they're in the travel process. And so therefore, travel for them becomes cultural. The group is commonly known to be early adopters of technology, early adopters of new practices, new things, because they're innovating and identifying a world to make it work for them. Because the traditional space is not crafted to accommodate. So they're creating a world that will accommodate, and travel is the most common place that takes place.
Absolutely. I just noticed early on at Pride events that the gay and lesbian community was just using iPhones and not like their friends. So it was just early adoption for technology is certainly the case. The only other thing I would add is that when I was at Orbitz, we did a survey, and mobile app usage, not only do they have more apps on their phones, they use them more frequently. And think about travel suppliers. The best situation for a travel supplier is when you book on their app. They don't have to pay a search engine like Google, so it is the most profitable thing for them. So technology has huge advantages. And if you think about the community, if you're using apps more, you're just a better customer. You're more profitable. Great. Well, I know that there's more data that this panel has to share. I'm just curious, does anyone have any recent research that they'd like to share with us?
Research is not my territory, so I will pass that to Caitlin.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. So we just did a survey with Zoom Vacations, and I got a number of responses. Got about 300 responses. Now, of course, this is going to our audience, which are people who generally want to travel in a small group travel environment. But one of the questions I asked, which I thought was really interesting, was about if you would want. A lot of our travelers take big cruises, they take small trips, they kind of do both. But in asking if they would be willing to take a large cruise ship experience in the next 2 years, over 45% said just no. And then about 20% were neutral, and then the rest were either between somewhat likely, and then there was like 5% who were a definite yes. But with small group travel, it was almost 60% who said yes, we would do a small group travel experience. The rest were neutral, and then only like 5% said no. But I think that when I'm hearing from my travelers, a lot of people they are interested in traveling in a small group experience, but not. I think people are daunted by large group. The other thing that was really interesting was in terms of domestic versus international travel, and this goes along with the question of how our mainstream, and then the LGBTQ travel audience is different. Right. Is that in general, from what my business partner Joelle and I are reading, a lot of mainstream audience is looking domestic, but that's not our findings with the LGBTQ travel community. It's not domestic. They want to travel internationally. Have you found that, Cordy, as well?
I would agree with that fully. As we look at our travelers and the people that we work with and the organizations, the LGBTQ plus community is so much more adventurous. And because we travel so frequently, domestic travel it doesn't stimulate them in the same way. And because we've been confined for so long, now people are looking at their bucket list trips and those things that they have not done. And they're like, oh, no, I must do it ASAP because I don't want to run the risk of not experiencing it. And I completely understand, because as soon as I can get to Denmark, I am going.
Well, after the recession, I think a lot of people thought, what I noticed is that the LGBTQ travel community was ready to travel before anybody else was. And I have my own theories about that. I think that, and Cordy, you can agree or disagree, and Caitlin, you can agree or disagree too, but I feel like for a lot of us, once you come out, like a lot of us, most of us have come out, it's one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And at the time when I came out, it was coming out as this thing that was kind of globally, the perception was globally hated, being gay. And it was tough, So going through that, after that, I'm like, recession, like whatever. Like I'm not gonna let that stop me from traveling. And I think that with the coronavirus, it's a little bit the same. I think a lot of gay travelers are like, whatever. I've gone through this. I've gone through that. I've lived through, coming out. We're still living, but living through HIV/AIDS. And so now with the coronavirus, like, you know what? No, there's always gonna be something. Let's go. Let's live my life. And partly it's what Courtney and I've talked about a lot in the past. It's that desire for connection, I think, is particularly large in the gay community.
Got it.
I would definitely agree with that, Brian. Even after 9/11 is another good example. I mean, there's been a lot of anecdotal data about our community being the first back. I think that travel is really ingrained in our DNA. There's a great deal of resilience and loyalty in our market to the travel industry. And that was something that we really wanted to explore at IGLTA. We did a post-COVID LGBTQ plus travel survey just to get a sense as well of how our community was feeling. We had about 15,000 global responses, and a clear majority, 66%, said they would feel comfortable traveling before the end of 2020, which obviously is coming up much more quickly than we realize. Lockdown has a way of making time morph very strangely, I find.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. We find that the LGBTQ travelers are more likely to take spontaneous travel, but also more likely to take those international trips. They tend to be more comfortable traveling alone as well than the general population. So I think, I know myself, I had to cancel a number of planned trips. So I think I agree there's that pent up desire to travel. And I think once folks feel more comfortable or restrictions are lifted, we'll be traveling.
Yep. When I look at different communities as we navigate through creating strategies, it's people are tribal, And when I say tribal, I mean that in a cultural sense. And when you think of the LGBTQ plus community, their convenings oftentimes took place in social settings. And in those social settings, it was based around interacting, engaging, and finding their community. And if you think of all the music of which they listen to in those famous songs, they're always leaning towards optimism and pushing through and being proud, to celebrate basically who they were. And so that celebration happens through travel. And if you think of the music, it's like, keep pushing on, things are going to get better. And that is like an anthem. And so that anthem becomes a part of their DNA and how they look at the world, or how we look at the world. And so when you think of travel, when you think of the challenges that we have now, the LGBTQ plus traveler is looking at, how can I do this safely, securely, but I'm going. They're committed to the end result of, I want to go. I'll take the risk, but I want it to be a calculated risk. And so they'll go through the extra challenges of finding out, how do I do this safely, but I'm still going. They're not going to live in fear.
Just keep breathing.
Absolutely. So tying all of what you just said to dollars and cents, what is really super interesting is the average travel spend. This is data many, many years ago. Harris Interactive did a study, and gays and lesbians spend 16% more on average on travel. That's a huge number, and a lot of it is from what you all said. It's more spontaneous trips, international trips. If you're going abroad, you're not staying for 2 or 3 days, although you might. You probably have a longer length of stay. So if you're a hotel or a destination, you are super excited when you get a visitor like that, because in addition, there's a higher propensity to travel in, for example, the shoulder seasons or off season, unlike the general market. So the higher travel spend is super valuable to the travel industry, and it's just a force to be reckoned with. My next question is really the LGBTQ plus community, by definition, is gay men and lesbians and bisexuals and transgender. I'm just curious, are there any important differences in travel behaviors among gay men versus lesbians versus other parts of the community?
Yeah, I do think that there are some different considerations for especially the transgender community and the gender nonconforming community. And even folks who may identify as gay but may not sort of like fit into the stereotype of what, a man is supposed to be or a lesbian, so I do think, things like TSA security, even that sort of ability to blend in, as a couple, you make that choice. Are we going to hold hands? But a trans person may, not have that choice to be able to kind of turn off their queerness and their LGBTQ identity as much. So I do think that there are different considerations for different folks across the group. But as more LGBTQ folks become families, I think, that also adds a layer of sort of similarity with the general population.
Absolutely.
I personally believe. Go ahead, Brian.
One of the things that really unites us all, though, is just the extreme desire, especially on vacation, is the desire and the need to be ourselves in whatever capacity that means for us. And so that's really the thing that's the most important, it's just paramount.
I would agree with both of your feedback, and as depending upon who's listening to the answer of this question, whether it be a corporate entity or or a traveler, each grouping of people has subgroups of people, and there's no one blanket message or experience that's going to hit them all just because we're all a part of LGBTQ plus. And there's going to be commonalities and commonality moments. But then it's going to be like spokes on a bike, and we're just going to go in different directions and do different things and hang amongst the identifying areas that we connect to or that we want to be a part of as an individual. Whereas I could be into going to see a drag show, where Brian could be more into, I want to go dancing, and we'll reconnect. Right. So we're both gay men, but we may want different things in our experience, and we will convene and break bread and then go in our separate directions. So yes and no to answer the question.
Got it. Got it.
No, I
So,
agree, Cordy. And I think just to chime in from the lesbian angle as well, often we're traveling as women first and we're looking at safety considerations that women would have that men might not have. And that might override the issues of sexual orientation. But I think at the end of the day, just as you said, Cordy, we're all completely different in our interests and our tastes. It's not a one-size-fits-all market, and that's where a lot of marketers make mistakes in trying to reach out to us because they want to try and be all things to all of us. But at the end of the day, what really unites us is the need to feel safe and welcome. And when our relationships are still criminalized in 70-some countries around the world, safe and welcome means something very different to our community than it does to the non-LGBT community.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, what is the business case if you're talking to a travel supplier or if you're trying to convince a destination to sort of to reach out to the LGBTQ plus community? What is the business case? How are you going to pitch this to that supplier or destination? Just curious. I know, Cordy, you absolutely did for the hospitality industry, and Loanne, certainly that's day in, day out. You are talking to destinations about reaching out to the community. What are your thoughts?
So when Wyndham, we were the first major hotelier to do LGBTQ plus marketing and to actually actively engage hoteliers or travelers to come to our hotels. And it's funny, as Loanne mentioned, women travelers are safety is one of those key risks. We had a round table and we were all dedicated to different segments. And Carrie Broussard, who led our women's initiative, basically created Women on Their Way. And they identified what does a woman traveler need. And the things that we identified at that table have literally rolled out to the entire hospitality industry. And so every time I walk into a hotel room now and I see a full length mirror, I know that was put there because of the things that we found out at that round table. So when you, first and foremost, discrimination does not exist in hospitality. Those two words do not go together. Hospitality is about welcoming, serving, and including. So if your practices as a organization include discrimination in any form or fashion, you're completely off brand. You've missed the mark and you're in the wrong industry. So if you're going to look to market and your marketing campaigns don't speak to a multitude of people or not inclusive and you're struggling, think of your children. Think if your child was something different than what you see and they looked at that campaign, would they feel included? And if you have to pause and question it, it's not the right campaign. And you need to look for ways to where when the general population sees it, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, their identity, that they say, this says welcome, come be a part of this.
Great, thanks. And Loanne,
It's a desirable
anything?
segment. It's a
Go ahead,
desirable
Brian.
segment for a number of reasons, though. I mean, I think the first thing people want to hear about is the money, and yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, Jeff, like LGBTQ plus travelers in general spend a little more, and I will tell you that with my gay group trips, I have to tell the hotel or the small yacht, whatever we're using at the time, to make sure you beef up have the spa ready, have your full staff working, and they're always like a little bit like, well, it's good, it's a bunch of men. And I'm like, yeah. So it is always, the spa is always booked out. You go to the bar, everyone is at the bar at the hotel, buying drinks and staying till late. Like, they're really, what I find, even more than our straight counterparts, they're really using those services. Like, they're really maximizing it. And so that's important. But the other thing is that I find that they're just wonderful travelers. And this is a stereotype. This whole conversation is, we're kind of based, there's a lot of stereotypes that we're having to use just to have this conversation. But they're wonderful travelers. Like, I'm always so proud when I go into, maybe I'm late to arrive to an event where my group is already there. They're already having cocktails or whatever. And they will almost always, they will know the bartender's name. They will know about his family. They will know about all these things. I'm like, you guys just found this out. You've been here for 10 minutes. How do you know all? Like, they always, they really, really get involved in the local, which is with the local people. And I think it goes back to what Cordy said earlier too, about just the connection, about the importance of connection. And I see it just within our travelers. I think that, Jeff, when you were asking about, about earlier, how do we market to them? I think one of the things that people get into trouble with is that they assume that like for me, I'm a gay man. I'm not an expert though in trans issues. I'm not an expert in lesbian issues. I'm not necessarily an expert in gay travel issues. I'm an expert in Brian Herb gay travel issues, you know. And I think that sometimes we try to like companies will be, oh, let's ask Phil, the gay guy. Let's ask Phil, the gay guy. Well, let's ask, hey, Phil, could you come in here? We're having a conversation about transgender issues. Phil doesn't know necessarily.
Right.
And I think that's a really big problem. I think that companies have got to do. I don't think they do enough. A lot of companies don't do enough research. Don't do enough broad spectrum research. Open-minded, realizing that kind of what we've been talking about insofar as that, you know, Cordy may want to go to a drag show. I may want to go to a dance club. There's different things for all of us. There's not a one blanket answer for all LGBTQ plus. We're lumped into LGBTQ plus, but there's so many differences. And I think that, again, we keep saying this, but it's just about being welcome, safe, included, and companies who just put that general ad in a magazine that's just, you know, that's not really pertaining to gay people particularly, or to LGBTQ plus people in general. If you're not showing a dedication to the market, you're missing the boat.
And to that point, your actions have to be louder than your words. It's very easy to do words and to put up a pride campaign in the month of June every year and carry a rainbow. But where have you implemented inclusivity in your organization to actually showcase the welcomeness? We were very fortunate when we started this that it came from the top. So it was from the CEO down, and it wasn't an option to be within the organization and to be exclusive. So you have to have hiring practices. You would want to have inclusive benefits. You would want to check your organization of however you're welcoming consumers to ensure if this constituent came to us, would they feel welcome? Are they going to feel safe? Are they going to feel included? What changes do I need to make to ensure that happens at every point? And how am I going to enforce it and hold my team accountable for when it doesn't? And if you haven't done those things, it literally is just lip service, and you actually run the risk of hurting yourself more, because when it goes wrong, it's going to go wrong in a big way.
Absolutely.
And I think the other word that we really have to emphasize too is the loyalty within the LGBTQ plus community, because if you do treat us well and make us feel included and welcome, then we are a group overall that does travel a lot, and we do have brand loyalty, and we will come back over and over again. And we also talk to a lot of people that are allies and our families, our friends. So you're not just making us feel included, you're actually marking in a much bigger way to all people who are on the side of equality.
Exactly.
Speaking on behalf of the gay man, we are the original influencer. Bar none, when you go back to the beginning of time, the gay man is often in his flamboyantness and the stereotypical part, but the women are asking for his opinion. The men are asking for his opinion, because wherever he is, it's a convening. The women feel safe. They are having a great time. So therefore, you have all the women, whether gay or straight. Then you have the men wanting to be where the women are. So therefore, they have to now be friendly and welcoming to the gay man. But his opinion of what's good and bad has always been the standard of if that's accepted, that's where I want to go. Especially when you think of service, style, and all these things apply to hospitality.
Interesting.
And travel.
Yeah, I get most of my data from Sex in the City, and I remember Samantha talking about that. Yeah, she's like, first you get the...
Caitlin, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to mention around, especially in the age of social media, it's very easy to share things. You don't have to have a phone call. You can share something to, 100 people, 1,000 people, 30,000 people with the click of a button. So, and unfortunately, we know that negative experiences are more often shared than positive experiences, especially when it comes to acts of discrimination. But I think it is important in our community to share those positive experiences where you had an interaction with a hotelier or a business owner, and share that with your community. And then that encourages folks. So I do think, having those small interactions will benefit that location as well as that destination as well.
Well, piggybacking off that, Caitlin, just to share something that I think is really cool is that Belmont Hotel Group, if you guys are familiar, I'm sure you are all with Belmont, they have an LGBTQ plus advisory board that meets, I think they meet a couple times a year. And I think that's one of the hotels that's really currently, in my opinion, doing it right.
Interesting.
And to add to that, Brian, Belmont, not only have they done it right, because we had two large groups that had to cancel with Belmont during the COVID-19 things in the Caribbean. Not only do they have the practices in place to support and welcome LGBT customers around the world, their practices of service and how to navigate through a challenge, just as standards, they're literally top of bar, as well as WindStar. WindStar, I think you use their yachts. Okay. Basically, those are two of the few organizations that actually actively engage tour operators of the LGBTQ place, small tour operators, to work with them. Obviously, Atlantis uses the bigger things, but when they had to have cancellations, not only did they cancel and give everyone, their passengers, full refunds, they paid all their travel agents their full commission to welcome them back. The loyalty that they received with that, 'cause like, I don't know how they're going to be able to afford this, but now everyone is anxious to get back on a WindStar cruise, specifically because they didn't just take care of us. They went above and beyond. And people remember those excellent moments of service. So to Loanne's point, the loyalty really kicks in when you're top of bar, we see it. And to Brian's earlier point about our spending and how we maximize on the bar, the services, et cetera, the LGBTQ plus community as a whole wants to maximize on the experience. And we live big. We like, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Either we're in or we're out. And if we're in, full steam ahead. And the industry has to adjust itself, because what do you mean you're going to drink out the bar before we leave the dock? What do you mean that you're going to utilize the full spa all day long? And and we think nothing of it, because culturally that's normal to us.
Absolutely. Let's talk about how things have changed over the past few decades. Think about it from the 1980s to the don't ask, don't tell era to today. Brian, I think you touched on this, is that in the old days, you really couldn't be your authentic self in many ways. Sometimes when you traveled, although you could be in select destinations in the world. But I'm curious, panelists, really, how has LGBTQ plus travel changed over the past 2 or 3 decades?
When we first started Zoom Vacations and we were working with different hotels around the world, it was very different. This was almost 20 years ago. We've been in business now for almost 19 years. And we had to it was almost like I felt like we were asking permission in a way with hotels to accept our travelers. And then we would have all these conversations back and forth about how our travelers were going to be treated and making sure it was a safe space. And we actually had oh my gosh, this is crazy. So there's a gay travel show called Bump, and out of Canada, and they were doing a gay travel show, and I was like their on-air person, whatever. And we were in I shouldn't say what, I don't want to put down any company. We were in a specific country doing a specific train ride. The organization sponsored the train on the show, but they didn't want any mention of them on the show. So this was almost this is a little over 15 years ago. They wanted free exposure. This would be all free advertising, right? So they wanted no mention of who they were or anything, but they still let us film, but we couldn't mention them. And then I think it was only 2 years after that they changed management, and they actually then got an LGBTQ plus representative with the hotel, and then they were trying to get different exposure. Like the very thing they didn't want 2 years before, they were suddenly like yearning for it, so that showed me just how much things like, that was just fascinating to me, that change. And now, like when we're reaching out to different hotels, of course we always check to make sure they're gay friendly, but the answer is always like, I mean, it's always almost people like, they don't understand the question. They're like, well, of course. Because now it's really like, and of course. Well, of course we're not stupid. It's like that. I mean, that's kind of almost the response. I mean, there's certain places where that's not going to be the case, but we're not going to Uganda. Like,
Oh my gosh, I think that question is incredible, and it makes me think of so many things that we've experienced. The grouping of us have experienced together over the years. To Brian's point, 20 years ago, LGBTQ plus travel, obviously we weren't at the forefront like a Hans Ebenstein, but we were coming in trying to navigate it, what had been established prior, to take it to the next level. So as we see everything that's happening now, it makes us smile because it's so drastically different. When we started our campaigns for Wyndham, we were genuinely concerned that we were going to affect our shareholders, our stock prices were going to drop, and it was going to be this huge ordeal, and we were going to shoot ourselves in the foot, and it was going to cost us monies and jobs. Well, as we look back now, and every single major hotel company in the world now has a open, active, very well-funded LGBTQ plus marketing campaign to welcome LGBTQ customers, not to mention the service standards that organizations like Community Marketing and others like it that are all members of IGLTA have worked to implement as industry standards. But the funniest story is when we went to Lebanon. We were on a travel symposium. Brian led it. He was chairman of the board. I was vice chairman of the board. And we're there to welcome, to figure out how we can open up the Middle East to create more inbound and outbound LGBTQ plus travel. And the local organization there informed us that they didn't want us there. And we were like, wait a minute, what? Because they were concerned that we were there to implement our Western ways and not allow their destination to evolve in their own way. And I fully respected it, and it really shaped it, and it shaped and shifted how I approach things going forward. And it helped me realize how I can be arrogant at times to think my way is the only way. But the real kicker is that destinations now realize the value of the LGBTQ plus dollar and the impact, and a destination that is based on tourism, and many destinations are. Some can afford to not have it, and others realize that's not a risk that we're going to take. We're going to shift how we approach things. We're going to evolve, and we're going to welcome these people. And as long as they respect us, which traditionally we do as a norm and a stereotypical whole, we're very great travelers because we almost act as ambassadors for our community everywhere that we go. And so we want to be respectful. We want to be engaging, and we're genuinely curious about new and different ways. And it's funny to see it now versus then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple of, oh, sorry, Caitlin, go ahead.
I was just going to sort of piggyback on, Cordy, what you were saying around being an ambassador. You know, in the past so many years, society and countries and towns and cities have become much more welcoming, and we've been able to sort of piggyback on that and travel more in those areas. But I also would be, curious to know the impact of those sort of pioneer travelers traveling to those places that weren't always as welcoming. What impact did those folks have as ambassadors, as just being who they are, sort of start to change the minds of those folks in those areas and allow those areas to become more welcoming?
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's actually really key in the messaging of IGLTA, is that we don't call for boycotts of destinations, because if you cut off LGBTQ communities, it's very hard for them to have any contact, and it's very hard for progress to be made. I mean, we really believe in LGBTQ plus tourism, and tourism as a whole, as a way of opening up minds and changing things over time. And if it weren't for working with some of the small business owners on the ground in countries that aren't particularly welcoming, then progress would never get made, because that change happens from within. But support from the outside is still critical to that process as well. There's been a huge evolution in IGLTA since we were founded in 1983, both from the point of view of corporate allies. I mean, to reference what Cordy and Brian were saying earlier, a luxury brand like Belmont, it would be unthinkable that they would be a global partner of IGLTA in 20 years ago, whereas now, they're such a proud champion of the association. And we have a lot of companies like that, like Marriott International or Delta Airlines, that are global partners and very visibly supportive of the association. But I think it's also about that expansion of the market into places that we weren't thinking about before. You know, you'd look at the LGBTQ plus travel world as a series of cities that were opening and welcoming. It might be New York and San Francisco and Berlin and Amsterdam and London. Whereas now you're looking at Japan, but it's not just Tokyo, it's Osaka reaching out and trying to be more inclusive to the market. It's not just Buenos Aires, it's throughout Argentina. It's throughout Thailand, it's not just Bangkok. So I think the spread of the welcoming messages throughout countries has been a really big shift over the last 20, 30 years.
To add on to your point, Loanne, what I would recommend to those listening now is that they look to those small tour operators, such as the Zoom Vacations, those travel agencies that really have the trust of their community and their constituents. Their constituents, now you want to talk about loyalty, because they have built a trust with that organization to identify best practices, safe experiences, as well as enjoyable experiences that are now a part of their life. And we wouldn't have the luxuries that we have today had those pioneers that built those small groups to go out and be explorers on behalf of all of us that have now created competitors for themselves, but the market is big enough to support all of them. As we navigate through the travel industry that really was impacted harder than pretty much so anyone else, those are going to be your key entities around rebuilding and navigating, because it's not going to come back in a big way. It's going to come back in small ways, and it's those organizations that are going to be the lifeline, because they're also going to be your visibility to showcase that we're ready, we're safe, we can welcome you, we can include you, we can navigate through this storm together, but still function, even if in limp mode. And it's not going to be the larger organizations, because you look to a Atlantis, which I completely respect what they do. I think their founder, although complicated, I really respect his contribution to the industry, because they are the largest, most impactful LGBT consumer base of anyone in the world. And when you look at how frequently they travel, but I am very concerned of whether or not they're going to be here in 2021, because they will have not made any money in 2020. And they continue, because they're cruise heavy. And the cruise industry, I don't know how that's going to work for the next few years. I know that business will go on and we will continue, but I tell everyone listening, whether a consumer or business, become very good friends with those small tour operators and the solid travel agencies, because they're going to be a key piece in the transformation, and the bigger groups are going to benefit from their visibility.
Yeah, well, I look at it. I mean, of course, I'm a little biased because I have a small gay group tour company. But I look at destinations such as Russia. We have a number of travelers who reached out to us wanting to go to Russia, but they don't really want to go on their own. Okay, so we developed a small gay group tour to Russia. Sold out. It actually sold out immediately. But I also got to receive a lot of emails from other people on our mailing list who were outraged that we were offering a tour to Russia. And then I would, along with what Loanne was saying about it, which is a very loaded issue. But I'm like, okay, so wait, so what if Russia's stance on LGBT issues never changes in my lifetime? Does that mean I never go to Russia, ever? Like I die having never gone there, even though I've always wanted to go? It makes sense in that sense to go with a trusted company. Another tour we offer that is our most popular tour and sells out every year is actually Egypt. We never get emails from people complaining that we offer a tour to Egypt, but we do with Russia. But they both don't have the most, gay-friendly, laws. However, I will tell you that when I've been to Russia and when I've been to Egypt, the individual people within the hotels, everything, it's incredibly welcoming. And there is a huge gay community in both those destinations. The only places that we really don't offer tours, to be quite honest, is a place that we feel is actually physically unsafe. for LGBTQ plus travelers. But otherwise, if it's a destination that you want to go, but maybe doesn't have the best record on LGBT plus issues, then yeah, go with a small group tour company. Go with a travel agent. Use a travel agent that you know and trust.
That's great advice. I will tell you that I might be the oldest person on this call or but I remember when I was growing up, Fort Lauderdale was the spring break epicenter. It was a bunch of drunken college students. And if you look at Fort Lauderdale today, it is like gay heaven. It is just there are gay residents. It is a popular gay destination. Talk about a destination transforming itself. And to Cordy's point and everyone's point, is being inclusive and enjoyable for everyone. That Fort Lauderdale, I think, is a great example of that. I'd actually like to talk a little bit about technology, because if you're talking about changes over the decades, technology and the sharing economy are absolutely critical. And there's two things I'd like the panelists to talk about briefly. One is, has technology actually hurt the community? In other words, gay bars and clubs. You don't have to go to a gay bar and club to meet someone who's gay anymore. You can just turn on your smartphone and go on a social app. And there's been a lot of changes, I think, in terms of the gay community, in terms of some of the venues, given the changes on how people meet and interact. And second, vacation rental, sharing economy. Think about it. You can now stay at someone's home in Andersonville, which is a very popular gay rich or gay popular community in Chicago. You can stay in the Castro. There are no hotels in some of the gayborhoods, but now you can stay right in the epicenter of the gayborhood because of the sharing economy. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on those two issues.
I think technology actually is great, and I completely welcome it. Because technology is just exploring more parts of our mind and our capability. I think the challenge with the lack of clubs is not because we can access community or a particular type of interaction via technology. I think that oftentimes the club owners and the management, they're not evolving with the time. They are continuing to offer a staid product, and the LGBTQ plus community is very aspirational, and we're going to always push the limit, and we love nice things. And if what you have is kind of, that's how much we're going to engage you is, but places that are evolving and coming into the space that are interesting, that are new, that are fresh, that have screens, and it's interactive, and it's just something different, and it feels good. It feels like now. It doesn't feel old and tired. And you can feel classic and as a throwback, and it's elegant. But if you just feel late or old, that's not going to work, and your longevity is going to definitely be impacted. And the technology piece, from a travel perspective, I'm a hotel guy because I love services. And there are times when I want a home that's a private situation, and I will do that. But then I'm going to hire services, and it's a completely different experience. I want a chef. I want a maid. I want all the things that go with it because it's vacation. And that's how I approach it. But there are other people that know that those things don't matter to them. I'd rather have a place based upon location because it's close to a bar, it's close to my friends, and we can do this. So it goes back to the earlier point that there's no one experience that is for everyone. There are going to be multiple experiences, and the right fit is going to go to the right fit.
Got it.
Yeah, I think the technology is an interesting question because it does allow for folks, especially in a community as small as ours, especially for folks who are in more isolated areas, to create those connections. So I agree, Cordy, that it's not like because we're able to make more connections outside of the real world that we don't also need those real world connections. I think we're all kind of finding that in these COVID times that we're still desiring that in real life connection with folks. So I think there, as you mentioned, a lot of different factors. And I think with regards to vacation rentals and even like room rentals in apartments, I think that's sort of opening up travel to folks who may not have been able to afford to rent a whole place or or a hotel room, and it is allowing for more of that immersive experience in embedding yourself in that culture, learning what it's like to walk, to work with these people who live here, and what that experience is like. So, like you said, everybody sort of has their own preference, and it's just adding another option for people who may want to travel that way. So I think both of those are good, and it's just important to kind of strike that balance between what we had in the past and how we sort of adapt with these new tools that we have.
Technology now gives us more.
In the earlier days of Zoom vacations, I remember I used to have to organize like gay group like outings in the evening, like gay nightlife tours, and I still offer those. We still offer those, but oh my gosh, I remember having to go out with people and show them a good time in the gay nightlife of Buenos Aires, and like the next day I would have like an early tour with the people who didn't go, like at 6 a.m. or something. I'm like, oh my gosh, now everyone's just, they've already like from Boston, they have already met their friend they're gonna meet up with in Buenos Aires when they get there, and people aren't like on my trips now for the last 5 to 10 years. People aren't even desiring or needing the gay nightlife component like they did 15 years ago.
Exactly. Great. So I'd like to move into an interesting thing. I'd like to get your reaction. I'm just going to read a couple of statements, and I'd love the panelists' reaction, whether you agree or disagree, and why. The first one, which we have touched on a bit already, is the following statement. Businesses that don't publicly support LGBTQ plus equality and or don't support LGBTQ nonprofits are unlikely to gain the loyalty of LGBTQ consumers. In other words, do you have to be visible publicly supporting equality, and do you also need to support the community to truly gain loyalty of the community?
I'll answer as the big corporate guy. My methodology, which is proven, it worked. And the entire industry followed my lead. So with that, but your actions are much bigger than your words. So if you're going to talk the talk, you need to walk the walk.
Right.
And if you want the LGBTQ plus money to impact your business, because your consumer is your most important part of your business. I don't care what your product is. And if you are actively going to welcome this particular community and their money to make your business work, then what's important to them as far as equality, basic human rights, I would recommend that it should be important to you as well, because if their money is contingent upon your success, you might want them to feel equal and continue to have money so they can spend it on you.
Great. Anyone else?
I would definitely say yes. I think there are a couple of things. I mean, what Cordy said absolutely is true. You need to invest in the community around you. And so it's not just about, putting on campaigns to make people feel inclusive, but to, provide diversity training to your teams and to get involved in local LGBTQ organizations. And to actively engage with the community so that it's not just talking about inclusivity, but really doing the hard work of educating your teams. And I think it's also, it goes beyond that too. It's with our community, we really need to feel like, there's an authenticity in the messaging, and that what we're engaged in, what we're happening as travelers and as consumers is a genuine message. And so if you're not doing that work behind the scenes, then how can we get a sense that it's real?
Absolutely. What I will say that I see today is I see a lot of companies suddenly and very prominently showing their support in terms of donations and resources for Black and Brown communities. What I would caution them, I think it's terrific, but it's all about long-term commitment. So what we see visibly today in terms of outreach and support if it's happening today, I want to look at those companies and see what they're doing next year and the year after. If you're going to be supportive, you need to have a long-term plan, not a short-term tactic. So I applaud the companies that really have a long-term commitment to the various communities, all of whom are really important customers. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Well, and most impactful is if you have anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric in your past messaging, and certainly, obviously, current messaging, epically damaging.
Epically, absolutely. Another thing, here's a statement. Mixed group travel, where LGBTQ plus travel with their straight friends and family, is a trend that will continue and increase in the future. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely increasing. Absolutely.
And Brian, I know you started this many, many years ago, so you're on the front lines of this.
Yeah, when we started our company, that was our whole thing, was that we wanted Zoom Vacations to be inclusive of LGBTQ plus people, and it was always and their friends and family every time. And like in our last trip that I did to the Caribbean, honestly, almost half of our travelers on that trip were straight. And but when you looked at the cross section of our group, you wouldn't, just by looking at everyone, you didn't know who was straight, who was gay. You had no idea, because everyone is just the straight people who are taking our trips. I mean, they're like gay people trapped in straight people bodies. Like, they're just the most important thing, as we've said through this whole session, is that just the ability to be yourselves is what matters. And so when anyone takes a tour with us, it's conveyed that, yeah, as long as everyone can be themselves, you're welcome on our trip. Pretty much, if you're not a jerk, you can come on a Zoom vacation.
Well, but you have to keep in mind that Zoom Vacations is built by someone from the Midwest and someone from the Caribbean. Both of you are big believers in family, and you come from cultures that are about being welcoming. And so as you look at what you've curated with Zoom Vacations, Zoom Vacations was a big partner of ours with Wyndham, once upon a time when Wyndham was more luxury oriented. And what you all have mastered is curated experiences. You meet people where they are, and you're very intentional about identifying what your consumers like and creating an experience that, one, they can be proud of, that they will enjoy. And when they go back and talk about it, they're excited and proud of what they invested their well-earned money into. So it's no surprise that people are coming back and like, well, my cousin wants to come. Well, my best friend from CrossFit wants to go. My friend from that. So you've kind of built that into your DNA.
Thank you. And by the way, our LGBTQ plus travelers love having the straight travelers on our tours. They're a good family. It feels.
And if healthy. I want to go back to Jeff's comment earlier about Black and brown consumers and travelers. It's interesting for Pride Month and the racial injustice protests and activism all to shift at the exact same time, because there's been a long time conversation around civil rights and LGBTQ equality. And having navigated both of those from beginning to end, or from beginning to now, it's interesting to see that intersectionality of the conversation, and to now see corporations openly welcoming the Black and brown LGBTQ community during Pride Month. It's a little mind-blowing. And to your point, I would love to see where that's going to be 5-10 years from now. But now you have organizations such as Native Son that literally their focus is specifically on that community. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it's just the whole landscape is going to look drastically different, because everyone's voice now is being heard at a much louder decibel.
Great. So the last area I'd like to talk about is just specific tips the panel has for people traveling now and in the near future in light of COVID-19. What specific recommendations or tips do you have to travel in this environment?
For me, I think it's similar to what advice I would sort of give to LGBTQ folks traveling, is sort of do your research in advance. Like in the past, it's like look into the laws in the country, look into how those laws are maybe enforced or not enforced. And I think similarly in this time, do your research around what you can expect. There are a lot of countries that are starting to open up, but requiring that you get tested immediately or that you go into quarantine. And so sort of understanding those expectations and also figuring out what you will feel safe doing or not doing, I think is also an important step there.
I would recommend that travelers take their safety and their security first and foremost. And I would also allocate additional resources specifically to put some barriers of protection around you. I wouldn't take a taxi. I actually wouldn't call an Uber. I would have a hired car service. So I could control your placings and your settings a little bit more during this time. And I wouldn't have just a beautiful mask that you bought off the internet that looks good. I would have an N95 and the beautiful mask that goes over it. I would put some extra precautionary steps in place to do what I could to protect myself from a health perspective first. And I would work with partners that have the most up-to-date information. And as that information changes, they're communicating that information to me. Like if you watch CNN in the US, if you're traveling abroad, that's not going to do you any good. You're going to need a more of an international organization or something local to where you can stay abreast as to what's going on. Travel can still happen, but put some precautions in place and be willing to spend a little bit more to do it safely. That would be my recommendation.
Great. All right. Well, we have we're going to wrap up. I don't know if anyone has any last words, but we're approaching an hour here, and I appreciate everyone's input.
After almost 20 years of knowing you all, and nice to meet you, Caitlin. It is so great to see you all during this Pride month and to kind of close out the week and think of, I built my career on LGBTQ plus travel and understanding the social movements of people. And to do that and have that journey with all of you and to close out this week is an honor and a pleasure to see all of you. And thank you for the invitation.
It's nice to meet you as well, Cordy and Brian and Loanne as well. And Jeff, thank you for hosting. I look forward to seeing where travel and the LGBT communities move forward in these next few months and few years, and how we can all kind of continue to work towards creating a more inclusive environment around the globe for everyone.
Terrific.
I've always been proud of how LGBTQ plus travelers, how we are pioneers. It's always been something that's given me great pride. I love I love my travelers. I love how we travel as people. And I just think it's actually exciting. I'm excited to see how we continue to blaze a trail post COVID-19. I know I see it happening, and I think it's going to continue, and it makes me feel proud. So for Pride Month, it's perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Tripadvisor Talk. Tune in next week for an exciting episode spotlighting global travel insights and our road to recovery. Many thanks again to all of today's panelists. Stay safe, everyone, and remember that even in times like these, there's good out there. Thanks again, and have a great day.